throwing that one in. And he did some testing at airstrip at Ferris Air.
Nice. A
So,
lot of Easter eggs. I think the producers nowadays are going to cater more to the fans than they did in the past.
and I've been watching Gotham.
Hmm.
I like, it's like anything. You get all these people getting on the internet bitching about these shows, and I'm like, you didn't, we had Spider-Man getting towed up a building on a really big rope, and we were happy. So like the stuff that you guys have got now that you're bitching about is like so far beyond the pale of what we could have ever conceived,
Hmm.
for being just a television show.
Yeah, just look at the old Captain America movie versus the one that just came out. So,
I just got I watched it again. I got the Blu-ray. That movie is awesome.
cool. Oh, let's start the show. Hi, welcome to the Pop Cult Online Power Hour, a show that's already in progress because that's the way we roll. And I'm your host, one of your hosts, Rick Gordon, and with me is Big Bad Bob Breetall. That's a mouthful. A lot of alliteration. How you doing, Bob?
Very good. Stan Lee could have made my name up. It's so alliterative.
And you would have taken all the credit, too.
That's right.
So you and I have been bandying back and forth for a while now, and I think what I want to talk about today are independent books, not the independent books that we all know and love that are current. I'm talking about non-Marvel DC books from way back in the 70s. Probably some of the first books I remember seeing in the spin rack were probably these books. The Harvey books like Richie Rich and Sad Sack and Baby Huey, and then you had Archie, perennial favorite, which is still going strong to this day, and loads of others, Dell, Gold Key, you name it, they were there. And for me, these were gateway books. I never actually bought any of them early on, but they did spark my interest, especially the Dells and the Gold Keys, because they usually had some really groovy painted covers, and which drew me to the book. But then once I opened it up, I was thoroughly disappointed by the artwork, and that wouldn't change until I started picking up Marvel and DC stuff in the early 70s. What was it like for you as a young Bob Breetall in the Midwest looking at spin racks?
The West Coast.
West Coast.
No mid coast here, or no Midwest. You know, I'm the same way as you. I didn't buy them, but I remember Richie Rich and Little Dot and Little Lotta, Baby Huey, Casper, Hot
Casper,
Stuff,
yes.
all those kind of books. And Uncle Scrooge, I still like Uncle Scrooge is my favorite, and I many, many, many years after I started reading comics full time, let's say, right? I would pick up some Uncle Scrooge reprints, and in the maybe the 90s when Another Rainbow did the Carl Barks Uncle Scrooge library. I picked that up and was reading through that, all the Carl Barks Disney stuff. And when I got to some of the Scrooge stories, I vividly remembered these stories like I had, I must have read these time and again when I was a kid, but I never, like I must have been 5 to 7, 8 years old.
Hmm.
But I didn't save any of them. They must have been totally thrashed because those books were not in my collection. When I always say, like, I started my collection, the first book that I bought for myself that I saved and, got me buying comics and reading comics every month was Amazing Spider-Man 88. And, all that other stuff was kind of that precursor to Spider-Man that I got, but, if it hadn't have been for those books, I wouldn't have probably moved on to the other ones, but unfortunately they didn't get the credit at the time because I just didn't save them. And and that's the other thing, when I was a kid, when I was around that age, you kind of had this, oh, those are kid stuff, and you
Right.
didn't read that stuff.
Hmm.
So, or, like girl stuff, like I know you love the romance comics now, and I'm actually starting to get into those because there's a whole bunch of comics that is completely untapped territory. I was going to say virgin territory, but those unrequited love kind of teen romance books that I don't have any of them. I recently got my hands on a Millie the Model comic, which we're not going to talk about those just yet, but I mean, I realized that was the very first Millie the Model comic in my collection.
Wow.
It was like number 160 or something like that. And there's just all kinds of romance comics and Western comics and the teen comics and the Dell comics and Charlton comics and all these kind of comics from more the 60s that, yeah, you know, and this was after they kind of archified, I've done some research on it, and like after like around issue 153, 154, they simplified the art style and kind of changed Millie the Model into that standard kind of Binky, Archie kind of book. But anyway, for the 60s, when I was a kid, I didn't have that stuff. So then I started in 1970, right? I started with Spider-Man, and I was hardcore into Marvel, for probably a good 5, 6 years. I would buy anything with Marvel on it, including Night Nurse, because it
I got a straight run of that. Yeah.
had Marvel on the cover, and I would get, if I was really hard up at the store, I'd get, Kid Colt Outlaw and Rawhide Kid, and they weren't my favorites, although I like them a lot more now. I kind of go back and can appreciate the Western books. But my first non-Marvel type of thing that was indie was the Atlas Seaboard stuff. That was kind of like in the vein of Marvel and DC, that they came out for like 8 months. It was like that company was there and then gone.
Yeah, tell me about that because I'm not familiar with that company at all. I mean, I know the Atlas, name,
If
but
you would have blinked, you would have missed the Atlas line. It came
wow.
out in 1976,
Hmm.
and I think it was 76, and it was out from around December, January through August. I mean, literally like 8 months. And there was and Larry Lieber, who's Stan Lee's brother,
Hmm.
was there, and like Howard Chaykin did the issue here or there. Steve Ditko worked on the books. We had Jerry Conway, I think, doing some of the stuff. We had, just lots of names that you would recognize that were freelancers for Marvel and DC, did books for, like Rich Buckler, the character who was to become Devil Slayer in like his I think Defenders
Defenders,
maybe.
yeah.
He started out, it was Demon Hunter maybe, Demon Hunter, Demon Slayer was the same character though, and Dominic Fortune started as Scorpion in
I
3
didn't know
issues
that.
by Howard Chaykin from Atlas. So I bought, and they had like a caveman that thawed out from a chunk of ice called the Brute. That was kind of like a Hulk kind of character. They had, wasn't Spider-Man. He was literally a Spider-Man, like the tarantula, and he had like all the big weird, hairy arms and all that kind of stuff. They had Sergeant Stryker, which was a Sergeant Rock, Sergeant Fury knockoff, and they had the different genres. They had the police detective Lomax, and just all these different. They had Wolf the Barbarian, that was a kind of Conan sort of thing. And I ate this stuff up. My favorite one was Planet of the Vampires, and Neil Adams did the first issue of that. he did the cover at least, and it was these astronauts. And it was kind of like Planet of the Apes. They go away and they come back, and like everybody's, like all these advanced cities where these guys live, and then there's all the other people outside, and like it turns out these guys are scientific vampires, and they get the regular people and they're draining the blood out of them, because they got some weird disease and they had to drink their blood. And then there was the Phoenix, who over the course of his 4-issue run, he was brought off into space by space aliens, got a suit from them, and escaped. And it was almost like Exo Manowar, from Valiant, but this character. And then they changed his name to the Protector and totally changed his costume in the last issue. Anyway, lots of great books there. Oh, and they had a their own teen book called Vicky. That, if I'm not mistaken, Vicky was a straight reprint of some other teen book where they just redid the bubbles and changed the words. It might have been Tippy Teen that they were reprinting.
Oh, no, Tippy Teen. I've got a couple of those. Great.
But, it was, they had all the different genres, and it was really kind of cool. I was buying most of them off the rack in '76, and it kind of, it's like, oh, there's something other. It wasn't like it was, when I started reading ElfQuest and Conan and these other ones that were, much more indie. And then by the end of the '70s, when First and Pacific and all these companies came along, and you started getting American Flag and Grimjack, and then it kind of took that indie stuff to a completely another level. But Atlas was like what you got from Gold Key with Magnus and Turok and Solar and Dr. Occult, who are being kind of revived now by Dynamite, and they had a lifetime, most of those characters in the '90s from Valiant. It's just like, they're superhero-y, right? They're kind of just off to the side of the superhero genre, but I think that's a great stepping stone kind of genre, because people who are really digging the superhero books, if you can kind of get them to try some of those books, and then they're kind of used to reading something that's not just got the Marvel and DC logo on it, then you can kind of take them another step and bring them out to some very different things.
Well, yeah, I'm wondering if there might have been distribution issues, because there was a time, probably around '76, I was collecting full-time. I mean, hardcore, buying every book I could get my hand on, Marvel, DC, whatever, magazines, you name it. But I do not remember ever seeing that. So I'm wondering if, it went out to the West Coast, never made it back east, vice versa. That's interesting. I'm going to have to do some research on these books, because they sound interesting. Just the creative teams involved, it sounds like it's going to be a better quality book than most of the other, quote unquote indies from that era. I mean, Rich Clark.
Yeah, I've got a spreadsheet. I've got a spreadsheet that has that I put together back. I did an episode on Comic Book Page one time. That was the whole episode was going through and talking about all those Atlas books. It was probably a back issue spotlight episode of Comic Book Page, and I made a spreadsheet at that time that had like a complete rundown of all the, like what month they were published, and some notes on like who the creators were. I'll send you a copy.
Yeah, that'd be good.
I should figure out how to put that up on Comic Spectrum.
Yeah. So I remember the thing about the earlier kids books, as they were, is you could read a couple of stories in the store while you were waiting for mom to do whatever, so you weren't committed financially like you were with a superhero book. Uh, I think probably that's where I first started reading comics. We're just sitting on the floor in some drugstore and just because you could read an Archie story in seconds and walk away satisfied. And I think that's what happened. The only books I remember actually collecting that were not Marvel and DC were Charlton books, because I distinctly remember buying E-Man, Vengeance Squad, and Charlton had a lot of war books, and I was really into war comics, so I know I grabbed a bunch of those also.
Man, do they have a lot of war comics. I mean, I've been looking, and when like fighting Marine, fighting Army, fighting, Coast Guard, I think. I think like every service is fighting somebody, and there's a lot of those books, and it's amazing. Like even the Love comics from Charlton and stuff, and I start seeing those in like $2 bins and things, and it's issue 160 of this, book that I have never seen before in my life. And I'm like, oh man, it's like I got a lot of collecting to do here. I could get like a long box of just Young Love.
Yeah, they did some horror books too, if I remember correctly.
Oh yeah, I picked up a bunch when I was at Long Beach Con. In fact, I might have some in a pile over here. Hang on a second. What did I do?
Let's watch as Bob digs through his massive stack of books.
Oh, in fact, yeah, that was some of the ones I was showing you. It's like I got this Baron Werewolf's Haunted Library. That's Charlton. And then the Dell, we had the Ghost Stories. I think I showed you. And then Charlton also was this Midnight Tales.
Yes, that I remember.
And it's just so many of them. And you got like Ripley's Believe It or Not from Gold Key, and there's lots and lots of these titles, and again, they went on for a lot of issues. A lot of these comics out there.
It seems like they ran parallel. They were hard to find, but when you did find them, they were usually cheap. And they were just very memorable books. E-Man especially. E-Man was one of my favorite books, and the fact that it carried over into the new age of indie in the late '70s, early '80s was even better. But
that was when I first discovered it. When Nicola Cutie and Joe Staton redid it like with First Comics, and then I discovered there was the Charlton run that wasn't that long that I picked up for fairly cheap, and then Modern Comics, I think. Modern Comics used to reprint a lot of the Charlton. I don't know if they were an imprint of Charlton or what the story was, but they would reprint a lot of just random issues of things like Geronimo Jones. You remember that? It was a Western.
Yeah.
It was a Western.
You touched on something earlier that just came back to me. All right, say around 74, 75, leading up to 76, I was collecting hardcore. I remember my father was a teacher, and he had a hold of these educational comics. Now, I'm not one for educational comics, but I took them because I'm into comics. And it was a series of Popeye comics, and there had to be, I don't know, 20 or so issues of Popeye, Olive, and the gang just talking about different jobs. Popeye and Olive go to a coal plant, or Popeye and Olive start a farm. It was really, really fun. And I remember reading a lot of Sad Sack at the time, too, because I thought that was the funniest comic book out there. And at some point, probably around the time where I stopped playing with toys, I just decided that these books are kid stuff. I can't continue to read them, no matter how much I enjoy them. They're for kids. I'm going to stick with the superhero stuff because I'm a grown-up now. They're written for adults. was into Howard the Duck, so how can I read Howard the Duck and justify reading Archie at the same time? I couldn't do it in my head at the time. And then I just kind of dropped the stuff and didn't pick it back up until, much later. And especially the Archie, because with the Archie books, I really appreciated what they were doing with the art. And it wasn't, I think the artwork was very deliberate, and it was very clean, and it was very concise and minimalist. And I really, as an older reader, I really dug that. The Sam Schwartzman stuff was just phenomenal, and that kind of pulled me into like Love and Rockets and some of the other indie books that had that similar feel to it.
No, you're right. On the Love and Rockets, there are a lot of artists from that simplicity of line school that a lot of people look at that and they just, and I'm guilty of it myself, but you kind of say it's like an animated feel because, in animation they go for that same economy of line because you got to, well, back then, you had to draw all these hundreds and hundreds of cells, to animate this sequence, and you couldn't have like really intricate, detailed line work all over the place. But there's a certain elegance to, being able to convey an idea with an economy of line work.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can see an artist that can, like Alex Toth could do this with his animated design work for something like Space Ghost, where you look at some of the work that's done there and it's so iconic and it's not over rendered.
Yes, yes.
You can take someone who like really renders the heck out of something and it can look, and there's a good to that too. It's just that, it's not that one is better or invalidating the other. It's like you were saying, you step back and you appreciate Sam Schwartzman or Bob Montana or Harry Lucy
Mm-hmm.
for what they're able to convey on the page. And it takes a certain, it's kind of funny, but, you love it when you're a kid, and then you go through this big period of your life when you don't, you're too grown up for that stuff, and then you hit this other point where you come over the hump and you're just like, you know what, that's good stuff, and here's why I can appreciate that stuff for what it was, and it's like really lost on people who are in that, that part of the curve that, is just kind of like they're not really digging on that stuff.
Yeah, like
maybe nowadays it's better with a lot more older people who are still watching the animated shows that are kind of hip or cool, like you'll see them watching Adventure Time and Regular Show and things like that. So I think maybe it doesn't have the stigma associated with it like a lot of things now, that people who are older can still appreciate that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like a perfect example, Darwin Cook. I absolutely love his art, and I don't know that I would have at the height of my collecting in my 20s. I might have looked at his art as being too simplistic and too cartoony, but now I wish more artists were like him.
Did I tell you last time they're doing a whole set of Darwin Cook covers for DC in December?
I can't wait.
Yeah, I think DCBS had you could order the whole set of them. Let me do a quick look here. I've got my DCBS spreadsheet for December, the October order for December. I can tell you what they're charging. It's a free ad for DCBS, but I like them. Okay, Darwin Cook variant bundle, $42.77. It is 23 Darwin Cook variant issues. The cover price, it's 9 books that are $3.99 and 14 books that are $2.99. So it's 45% off cover price. Okay. That's not a bad deal.
That's a steal. Steal at any price.
And, they'll get me to actually read or try to read anyway. 23 DC comic books.
Oh, so where did you get most of your books in the 70s? I'm assuming off of a spin rack, but were there certain stores that you went to on a regular basis? What was your process in 1973? Say, weekend comes up, you got a couple dollars in your pocket. How are you going to spend it?
I don't remember when 7-Eleven came along. 7-Eleven was certainly there in like 75. So 7-Eleven was in my rotation. But where I lived, there was a grocery store that was diagonal across the street from where the 7-Eleven ended up being when the 7-Eleven opened. And they both had a spinner rack. And that was like, I lived on one main street, and they were the next main street to the south of where I lived. So it was, probably a 4 or 5 block walk down, just the shorter in between blocks. So it was like, maybe a 10-minute walk to get up to either of those stores. And they both had a spinner rack. Then in the other direction, the next main street to the north of the street where I lived, which again was, about 10 minutes the other direction, there were 2 liquor stores. Now out in California, I think I mentioned, and it might have been like this in New York, it's not like this in the Midwest. When I would go visit relatives in the Midwest, and we used to go every summer to Chicago, and we would drive. And I would get comics on the drive at like different Stuckey's and, gas stations and convenience stores and stuff. But I would go there and I'd say, hey, where's the liquor store? And my relatives would look at me like I had 3 heads, because it'd be like, what's this 10-year-old want liquor for? Because the liquor stores there, they only sold liquor. Right? You go in there and it's just like booze everywhere. It's just booze-a-rama.
That's what it is in New York.
They didn't have, it was like they had convenience stores, which I don't know what they called them then. But, out by us, the liquor store had, a big wall of liquor, but then it also had, bags of potato chips and a candy bar aisle. It was more like a 7-Eleven. And then it had a magazine rack. So it didn't have a spinner rack. It would have that kind of wall that had, all the one section, and it would have all the, car magazines, and it would have the girly magazines. And, it didn't have as many women's. I don't think women really went into the liquor store to buy their magazines. I remember there being car magazines and girly magazines and just regular general interest kind of magazines. And then there was a whole section of comic books. And there were 2 of these liquor stores up that way. And so those 4 stores, between those 4, and then when my mom would go grocery shopping, there were, whatever store had sales or special coupons in the paper, she would go. If, this store over here had, roast on sale for really cheap, she would go there and buy that, or, whatever. And then all the grocery stores had a spinner rack. So I would go, and she would shop, and I would look at the spinner rack, because every store had different. I mean, there were some titles that were,
right. Every store had a different,
different. What happened to be at that store. So, if you wanted to get every issue of Spider-Man, it wasn't necessarily always at the same store. It would just be kind of random, whatever kind of they threw off the truck when they were, stocking that store. It was tough. I remember, man, I missed, your entry into Spider-Man, that Death of Gwen Stacy issue. I didn't get that when it came out.
Wow.
I missed that issue because it wasn't at any of the stores around me, and it was like 6 or 8 months later that I ended up having to trade a whole bunch of other stuff to some kid to get my hands on that issue.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, when I was 10, there was we lived in an apartment complex, and there was like a long road down to the main road, and across the street there was a small plaza that had three stores. One was probably a liquor store, but one was like a little. It wasn't really a convenience store because they didn't have convenience stores back then, but it was the closest thing to it, and it was owned by a kid that I went to school with. His parents owned it, and I, to this day, I can close my eyes and see how this store is laid out in my head. You go in, there's the counter with the register. All the way to the right, there's a large rack with magazines. They kept the comics on the bottom shelves, just kind of laid out, like piano style. And I remember really digging that because if you remember how Marvel was back in the day, when you lined up the comics, it was real easy to see what books were there.
Oh yeah, they all those corner boxes were great.
Yeah.
I love.
So you have a dozen books lined up like that, it's no problem. And that's how I got my books for the longest time. And it was never the same month to month. It drove me absolutely batty. I would go there every week, and sometimes there were no superhero books at all. There were just all Harvey or all Archie, maybe some DC, but some DC romance. It was just crazy. And the first time I saw Spider-Man, it was issue 121, even though I had been in that store for years. So it was strange. Then we moved like a year later, or maybe two, out to the middle of nowhere. We're out in a rural area, so what we had to do is go into town on the weekends, and that was usually a Sunday. And I'd start off at Hopewell Pharmacy, go to Neustadt Pharmacy, and go to Rexall. So there were three stores that I would go to. And then a couple of years after that, a 7-Eleven opened up across the street. And so there were four stores that were in my route. And like you said, there were absolutely no duplications in any of these stores. So you just had to go every week and fill in your holes where you could. And once I got old enough, I would take my bike and just you could make a day of it.
That was true. I mean, when I was in 1978 was when the first comic shop opened near my house. And it was a little farther away. I mean, I could walk there because it was like across there was one big shopping complex, just like what would be a big supersized strip mall now. It had did they have a store called TG&Y by you?
No.
It was kind of like a five and dime kind of store. You'd go in there and they'd have the bins of penny candy and just all kinds of weird little junk, and they'd have dry goods and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, this little strip mall had a TG&Y, and it had a grocery store, and around the other side there was a hobby store where I would buy models, and that's where I got like that,
Yep.
that Spider-Man model by
Aurora.
right. And but I would go there. But then they opened up across the street from that. They opened the comic shop. So once that was open, it was like heaven because they got all the comics, and I started just ordering my comics. They would mimeograph a thing with all the comics, and I would just write, I want this one, this one, this one, and I had a pull box, and I've had a pull box ever since 1978. I mean, it's just been like every month I pick what I want in advance, but I still would look at the racks because you get stuff that you didn't pre-order because it wasn't stuff that you collected, but you still want to look at it, and if something caught your eye, you would try something new. Now, before the comic shop opened, there was, a fair distance from my house. I used to ride I had a 10-speed bike by this point. And this place must have been maybe 6-7 miles from my house.
Wow.
It was quite a long way away. It was I lived in a city called Granada Hills, and this was someplace called Panorama City. and it was a long way. I mean, you had to go. It was like maybe a 30-minute bike ride to get over to this place. But there was this big magazine and bookstore there that had, you like, I would read, by this point, I'm reading paperbacks like a madman also. I was getting all the, Robert E. Heinlein books and Asimov. I love sci-fi and fantasy. I was reading the Conan books by Howard and L. Sprague de Camp and all that, So I would go to this store and I would buy a couple of paperback books, and they had this huge magazine rack section where, I mean, they had like almost all the comics, way more than the liquor stores had. And I would go there and I would, come back with, I had like, you had that kind of rack thing on the back of your bike, the tension thing that you'd F up your top book by pinching, or you'd have like bungee cords or something that you'd use to tie the stuff down. But I mean, I would go to this store and I would buy like a big stack of stuff, and you'd kind of do the best you can to affix it to the back of your bike and ride 30 minutes back home with your bounty that you got at this store. But I mean, that was a long way away.
Yeah. Wow, oh man, you were so lucky, because there wasn't a comic shop in my area probably until the early 80s. I remember walking through the mall. God, it had to be 82. And there was a baseball card show. And I was kind of still into cards at the time, and I see a guy selling comics. So I go up, I start talking to him, and this guy is amazing. He really knows everything about the books. And he pulls out this copy of Hawkman that I think I still have. And he's telling me all about Murphy Anderson and the beautiful artwork. And, he's gingerly displaying this book for me like it's, like it's gold. And I wind up buying it. And it turns out this guy owns a comic shop up in Poughkeepsie, which is, a few miles north of where I was. So I keep trying to go up there. He's never open. Come to find out, he likes working 9 to 5. I get off of work at 5, so I can never get there. So at one point, I actually get off of work early, and I go there. And having never been in a comic shop before, now I'm an adult, it was, like you said, it was nirvana. It was absolute heaven. Everything is there. Not only can I get all of my new books, he's got this tremendous, tremendous collection of back issues and a whole wall of these great vintage books. And I was just overwhelmed, so I became a customer. I became one of his good customers. And I just remember I got to know him. I got to know everybody that worked there, became friendly with everybody. What's up, Paul? I know Paul's listening, and that's where I met Paul. You remember Paul.
Yep.
And I just made a remark to him one day, man, I would love to work in a place like this. And he offered me a job, and I would work there on the weekends. And it was, without a doubt, the best job that I ever had. The money was crap. There were no benefits. The hours were lousy. The clientele was unruly at best. But I loved working there. It's just one of my fondest memories of my life are, working in a comic shop, because that, to me, that was the ultimate. Besides actually owning one, which I don't think I would do at this point. Business being the way it is, but yeah, that was something.
That's funny, because I mean, I love a good comic shop, and I love visiting a comic shop. I never had a desire to work in or own a comic shop. I love living hand to mouth, and it's just like, because I always, like, once I graduated high school, I got a job in computers, and I made decentish money, and I just like, well, I can work here and I make this money, and I can go and buy whatever comics I want. I don't want to work for peanuts. But
well, I like the customers. I mean, I loved.
I do remember those days before the internet, when I would just go to the comic shop and I would hang around in the comic shop and just
Yeah,
talk with people.
that's
And
yeah.
once I got mobile, once I had my own car, I mean, when I would borrow my mom's car, I could every now and again, you could drive to, the comic shop or here or there. Once I graduated high school and I got a job, then I bought a car. And I bought a car from my brother. My brother sold me his old car, so I must have been, maybe it was, no, yeah, I had to have been 17 or 18. And my brother sold me his car. It was like at this point about 3, 4 years old, his car. Had
Mhm.
about 90,000 miles on it, just a little Honda Civic. But, I
Oh,
got that for a couple of $1,000s. And, my dad loaned me the money and I paid it back to him, whatever, $100 a month. And I had now a car and I could drive. And I found there was this bookstore called Passport Books that had this crusty old dude named Earl that ran it. And his wife worked at the shop with him, and her name was like Dee or Dee Dee. And it was like Earl and Dee Dee, and they ran. And this place was over in North Hollywood, which
uh-huh.
was probably 10, 15 miles from where I lived. But I just discovered this place because when you probably were able to do this, I mean, you would look in the phone book, right? And I would find comic
Yes.
shops. And on the weekend, I would go and I would pull out we had a Thomas guide, like a map book, and you'd look and you'd find it on your map and you'd go there and you'd hit these different shops, and some of them were good and some of them were not so good. But I used to love Passport Books because I didn't buy the new books because I had my local shop, my Continental Comics, where I got most of my new stuff. But these other shops like Passport, he had right inside the door this big wall of just kind of like cubby holes that were all full of comic books just laying in stacks, right? And each one was maybe, you know, 8 inches to a foot high, and it would just have a stack of comics in there. And they were, I don't know, like a quarter a piece, or they couldn't even have been a quarter a piece because a new comic back then was a quarter. I think they were like a dime or something, a dime or 12 for a buck. And, I was going, and at the time, this is like maybe 1980, right? So, I'm finding all kinds of DC and Marvel and stuff from the mid 70s that I didn't buy when I was originally buying it off the rack, and I filled in almost my entire late Silver Age and Bronze Age collection off of that shop and a couple of other shops like it in the San Fernando Valley
Wow.
that just, had these quarter bins, 10 for $1 bins or whatever. And, then you had, like the key issues would be higher priced. And, you always kick yourself that you didn't buy Fantastic Four #1 when it was, like whatever, like $40 or something, it's like, oh, $40.
Yeah.
Can't do it. It's like, well, if you had only known.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Did you have shops like that when you first got mobile and had a car? Did you, because you were still
He,
living out?
he had there was nothing. It was absolutely nothing. And I'm glad you brought up the phone book because this was a habit that I developed probably in the early 70s. I would go, probably later, mid to late 70s. I'd go through the phone book looking for comic shops. And I remember doing it whenever I went into a different town. I would find a phone book and I would
You would
scan.
go to a phone booth, right?
And, yeah, and I would scan the yellow pages. I would always get the computers and say, shit, there's no comics here. And this went on probably until I discovered Netscape Navigator. I'm not joking. This is something that is so ingrained in me. if I went someplace different, no matter where I went, I would get a hold of a book and see if there was a comic shop around. And if there was, I'd go and see it, whatever. But I just distinctly remember, scanning down the yellow pages, blah, 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 computer, they don't have it. I'm done.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it would be so I got married young. Janine, I started going out with her when I was 21, maybe, and we got married when I was 23. So, we've been married. We'll be married 30 years next year. So people always say, "Oh, 50-year-old virgin." I'm like, no, I've been married 30 years. But when we would go, she has always been so supportive of my collecting because she knew I collect. I never hid anything from her. This was like reading comics. That was part of what I was, so she always knew, and she's fine with it. And when we would go on vacation, I always remember because she would give me a day when we went to, we'd go to Seattle. Or, I remember we would drive, because we would drive on vacation. We would go to Seattle, or we went to Vancouver. We went to Victoria, British Columbia. And every town we went to, she would let me stop. When we would be in the hotel, the first thing I would do when we would get to the hotel for the night was I would look in the phone book in the hotel, and I would find where the comic shops are, and I would map it out on our Auto Club map. And then she'd let me go, and we'd see the city, and we'd have lunch someplace, and we'd go visit some comic shops. And I went to comic shops in San Francisco, and in San Jose, and in, Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, and Vancouver. And I can remember, way back in the 80s, when we would be on vacation, and we would go to comic shops wherever we were at. We'd be in Phoenix, and we'd find comic shops. We went to Chicago for a family reunion, and one day I went, and I still remember buying my Gil Kane Black Panther page from Jungle Action at a comic shop in Chicago, in the suburbs of Chicago. And it was.
What are you talking about? You do not have a Gil Kane Black Panther page, do you?
I have a Gil Kane Black Panther page.
Holy cow!
Awesome, Rick. It was like $20 or something.
Oh, you're killing me! I just felt the chest pain.
1985, it was like just some comic shop, and I don't even remember. It was some comic shop in suburban Chicago, and it's like. I saw it. I was like, "This is awesome!" I remember reading. It was from Panther's Rage. It was like, it has Baron Macabre is on.
Oh my God, that's the first one I bought. I remember that. Yeah, that cover.
I've got it on the wall. You want to see it?
Yes, I do. Bring that thing here. And while Bob is doing that, make sure to check out ComicSpectrum.com. That's his site, and it's really good. It's a really good resource for the new collector, the old collector, the in-between collector. Check it out, Comic Spectrum. Look at that.
Look at that. Okay, so let's flip the camera over to there. I'll zoom it in a little bit here. Let me see if I can get past this pile of comics. Look at that image up there.
Oh.
Of the Panther. Awesome. It's got some great action going on it. And I love it. It's Jungle Action number 9, I believe.
Written by my good friend Don McGregor, who is going to be at New York Comic Con this year, so go by and check it out. He's going to be there with Doug Mensch, another buddy of mine who I've interviewed. Go see those two. They're there for the 75th anniversary of Marvel. There's going to be a lot of stars there. Unfortunately, I won't be there because they don't do the podcasting arena anymore. So, screw you, New York Comic Con. I'm not bitter.
I'm missed it by a couple of weeks, right? Or barely, like one weekend. Although I wouldn't have had a ticket anyway, so.
Trust me, we could have gotten in there. Not a problem. Oh, yeah. So, wow. I just love reminiscing. Yeah. So you were out there on the West Coast in the land of plenty, and I was scavenging around a post-apocalyptic desert of comics, and really didn't hit the stride until the '80s. And actually, once I started working in the comic shop, that's when it got a little too easy, I think, because I got I think Heroes World was our distributor at the time, and I would get the list and just pull my books every week. And the books that I didn't pull, I would read because, oddly enough, there's a lot of downtime when you're working in a comic shop. So I'd just get a big old stack. 'Cause a lot of times I would work Sundays because nobody wanted to work on Sunday. It was our slow day. And I talked our owner into opening up.
You get paid and you read comics, right?
I talked our owner into opening up on Sunday because, there's people wandering around after church, and I'm sure they're going to buy comics. So I would usually get a stack about this big and just sit there and read and try to catch up. The reason I wanted to read is because I wanted to be able to talk to the customers and answer their questions. This was right around the time that Batman was starting to really gear up. We're heading into the second Batmania, and we're getting a lot more foot traffic in the store. So everybody had to be really sharp and really know what they were talking about because, these weren't kids coming in. These were moms and dads who knew nothing about comics. So you had to educate them quickly and efficiently and get them to buy for their kids. And the easiest way to do that was to, find out what the kid liked, steer them toward that, and if that didn't work, then the gift certificate, which is a great idea, even to this day. A gift certificate or a gift card to a comic shop, it's a win-win.
You like the thrill of the hunt, though, right? I mean, you're a thrill of the hunt kind of guy.
Yes.
Because I know you go all your flea markets and estate sales and all this kind of stuff.
Right. Now,
Talk about how you find and do that stuff, because I'm fascinated, because I have lots of commercial establishments here, but I'm not hooked into the estate sale.
It's a weird process. The way that Janine would go with you to comic shops, Becca and I would go to toy stores. Vintage toy stores is my thing, and comic shops. But when I was younger, I remember going to a couple of garage sales with my mom. And it was just interesting to me from a sociological point of view. Here's people selling off their things for whatever reason. It just fascinated me. And it wasn't until I was older, I'm trying to think. Yeah, oh my God! Okay, now it's coming back to me. I went with my mother to a garage sale. Now I remember it. First time I ever saw Iron Fist was a comic book from a garage sale. And from then on, whenever I had the opportunity to go to one, I would go looking for comics. Now, eventually this branched out into record albums and other stuff, but in the back of my head, I'm always looking for comics. And it probably wasn't until about 12 years ago that I started doing it on a regular basis. You can go in the paper, you can look at the ads, and you can, if there's comics there, people will pretty much say it. You go, you check it out, you can usually get them at a good price, and then you just move on to the next one.
Are they mostly on Saturdays, or is there Sunday action?
It usually runs Thursday to Sunday. Now, a garage sale is just basically, I've got a bunch of stuff, I want to get rid of it, I'm going to put it out in my yard, I'm going to put it in my driveway, I'm going to put it out in my garage, and then people are going to come up and buy it or not buy it. An estate sale is, I'm moving, I don't want to take everything with me, so I'm going to sell off everything in the house. Somebody dies, a parent, the kids decide to liquidate the contents of the house or divorce, any number of things. That's a different story. That is, you're walking into somebody's home, it's usually untouched, and you're just basically digging through their stuff.
Preying on human misery.
Exactly. Now, my process is I look at the neighborhood. If it's an older neighborhood, if the houses were built in the 50s and 60s, I have a pretty good idea. If I look around and see that the owners are in their 70s, I have a pretty good idea that if there are kids, they're going to be about my age. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for toys from my youth and earlier. If I go into a newer development, something built in the 90s, one of these McMansions, I just know it's just going to be filled with, brightly colored plastic crap from the 90s and the 2000s that I have no interest in. There are a lot of, if you're patient, if you know how to look, if you look for clues, I've learned from Becca, it's mostly detective work. You look at the house, you determine the age of the owners, you can look at the house and tell if they had kids or not. Then you start looking at places where they might put things. If the kids are grown, check the attic, check the basement. If the parents were hoarders, not hoarders, but if they save things, they're going to be in there. You go, you dig around, you find good stuff. If you have parents that were neat freaks that, once the kids outgrew their toys, they threw them out, that's pretty easy to tell also. So you just zip through the house and you move on. Some of the greatest books that I have in my collection were from garage sales. Becca, I was at a baseball game with Devin. Becca was coming later. She stopped at a sale, and she said, "There's a box of comics here. Are you interested in them?" He's like, "Well, what's the cover price on the books?" That's the first thing I had to teach her. If it's anything between 12 cents and 25 cents, I'm interested. So she told me they're mostly 12-cent books, but the one on the top is Green Lantern. Really? Which one? Number 2, I think. So describe the cover to me, and she did. And she bought the whole box for, I think, under $10, and there were 25 books. And it was indeed Green Lantern number 2. So, but the rest of the box was just filled with.
Where do you come up with the $110 from? I mean, do they have some kind of a vague notion about what this is worth, or
No. $10. It was just $10.
Oh, $10.
Yes.
$10. I thought you said 110.
No.
$10. Okay. So this is like, put on an eye patch, stick a parrot on your shoulder, and just like, Army Hardee's.
So
I pillaged this place.
So she got the books, and there was maybe 5 or 6 good books. The Green Lantern being the key book in there, but there was some interest. There was some Tomahawk and some other odds and ends. But that was a good score. There was another one. I bought a long box for, I want to say $35. And I didn't take a good look at it. I just scanned it real quick, and it looked like my intent was to take these books and just flip them at my garage sale in the $1 box or 50-cent box. So I think I offered her 30, and one of those books was the Fantastic Four number 40 that I sold by mistake for $1.
I remember you telling me this story because you just kind of tossed that box out there.
Right.
And some other dude came to your sale and said, look at this.
Karma, yeah. But it was just one of those, I've got boxes that I haven't, fully processed yet. So
Bizarro Rick.
One of those things. Who knows? There might be other books in there. I just don't know.
Can I go through your boxes when I come and visit and buy comics from you for 50 cents a piece?
Just
I bet
doesn't.
there's a lot of dollar romance and western books from the 70s and 80s that I'd want.
I
I mean,
oddly enough,
70s and 60s.
I do not have a lot of Western books.
Well, war, romance, any of that stuff.
Yeah, they're here.
Cracking, man.
They're spread out all over the place.
You gonna show me a good time when I'm there?
Yeah, you're going to see the Batmobile collection up close. It's actually quite impressive.
I want the full treatment.
You get the full nickel tour. I'll show
And
you.
then the best one or two comic shops in the Albany area.
Oh, wow, that's easy. That's going to be Earthworld, and where else can I take you? Oh, I'll take you to Excellent Adventure up in Boston Spa. It's a bit of a ride, but it's well worth it. Go up in there and see my man Brian. He'll take care of you. He's got good.
I'm staying downtown Albany,
Mm-hmm.
so
We'll take care of you. Don't you worry. You'll get to see the Spider-Man room in person.
I want to see it all. Didn't offer to let me sleep in your Batman room. I could have slept right on top of that Batmobile I see behind you there. Curl up behind the wheel.
I actually have some Batman sheets you could probably use. And there's a pinball game you can play. It's different. It's different. There's a lot of stuff in here that's just all kind of crammed together, and it's interesting. It's sloppy. It's messy, and I like it.
So I'm to see about getting you on TV, sir.
Should we tell the folks about that?
You can tell the folks.
All right, you tell them. It's your story.
I'm going to be on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Well, I am theoretically going to be on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. They're doing a Guinness week, and all people who are Guinness record holders, so the Guinness publicist turned the producer on to me, and I had to go through several interviews, including a video interview, and they liked me, and I answered 18 of the 20 questions, and they liked the way that I did it. And so I've been invited out to a taping of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. It's happening on the 18th of October, so coming up in just a week and a half. And I need to have a lifeline, and they got rid of the phone a friend lifeline because I think people were just phoning guys sitting on Google who would look up the answer for them. That's the best I can figure. So now there's a lifeline called the +1 lifeline. And the way the +1 lifeline works is you bring a friend to the studio, and that friend, who is Rick, is mine, and that friend comes to the studio, and if I need help, then the friend comes out on stage with you, and you guys mull over the question together and pick your answer together for that question. So they can't guarantee anything, whatever can happen happens, but in theory, we'll be in Stamford, Connecticut on the 18th of October, and Becca will be in the audience, and Rick will be back in the green room with me, and hopefully I'll win something. And then that night, we drive back up to the Albany area, and then I'm going to spend Sunday with the charming and wonderful Gordon family, and get
And
to
Green
see
Arrow.
all this stuff live and in person.
Oliver Queen is looking forward to seeing you.
That's great.
I've been brushing up on my trivia. No, actually, I haven't. If I know it, I know it. If I don't,
That's pretty much the way I'm handling it. I mean, it's just like you have no way of anticipating what they're going to ask. You could study a million facts, and they're not going to be the facts that they ask you. So it's pretty much just like you're going to know it or you're not going to know it, and it's just like how do you use your lifelines, and it's more on strategy on how to play the game. I mean, my goal is to not flame out on the first question and embarrass myself.
So
They shuffle the questions now.
Oh,
So the first 10 questions, they shuffle them. So the very first question you ask could be a $10,000 question, which is a harder question than a $100 question. So you don't know when they ask you a question. You could get a really hard question right out of the gate, and theoretically could just crash and burn. You know.
yeah, no
So,
point putting pressure on.
you know, if you get through the first 10 questions, though, you walk away with at least $25,000. So
Hey, that's nothing to sneeze at.
that after taxes is enough to get me an Amazing Fantasy 15 in low condition.
Or a bottle of Batman cologne.
I bet I could buy that with the pocket change that I've got on me right now.
I dare you, sir. This is so rare. You will not find this anywhere.
The guano-scented cologne. Smell like a white surface in the Batcave.
I'm actually looking forward to the show. It's going to be fun. You know what? Even if we lose, we get to see each other for the first time.
We get to meet, and we get to meet Terry Crews, who most people don't know who Terry Crews is, but you know who Terry Crews is.
Yeah.
I know who Terry Crews. I want to meet Terry Crews. They told I talking to the producer. She said Terry really takes an interest in reading the interview. You know, I had to fill out a questionnaire and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They said he always reads that stuff, so he knows about the contestants and likes to meet them and kind of chat about
Nice.
their stuff. So that's actually kind of fun. I mean, I look forward to meeting him. We can't bring any of our phones in, so maybe we can bring him in and take a quick picture, or they'll take pictures or something. I don't know.
I'm sure they'll
We won't have pictures.
Yeah.
We'll have to have Becca in the audience with a camera taking pictures.
It's going to be good. It's going to be good. I can't wait. Well, wrap this up because I got to go to bed. I know it's early out there where you are, but...
Well, that's right. I'm 8 minutes into the Green Arrow season premiere.
Oh, jeez. Let's all right, folks. That's it for tonight. Yeah, well, I already threw a shout out for Comic Spectrum, but you can
Very
do
good.
You can do it again if you'd like.
Come visit us. Oh, you know, if you're listening to this, go to the Comic Spectrum Facebook page, because Steven is running a Kickstarter for a tabletop RPG that just watch the video for it, because I think he did a really good job on it. And he just funded today, got $3,000 in pledges, and he's going for stretch goals now. So if you check out the video, if the game looks like it's fun, you know, throw $10 at him and get a PDF version of the game. It's a fun game. They've been play testing it here in the house for the last couple of months, and I keep hearing lots of laughter and frivolity and good times being had by people playing the game.
Cool. Do it, or I'll find you and I'll make you do it.
That's right. One more week.
Yeah. All right. That's it for now. We will see you next time on the Pop Cult Online.
Probably after Millionaire.
Yeah. We'll be covered in gold and doubloons and jewels.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Good night, Bob.
Even if you win, they don't pay you $1 million. It's like they give you $250,000, and then the other $750 is paid out over 20 years. And the government takes 50% of everything anyway. So I mean, it's like not like I would turn my nose up at $125,000, but it's not the kind of money that you're going to be going into work on the next Monday, flipping off your boss saying, "I'm out of here." You know, it's just like.
No, I wanted to see you do like a big Scrooge McDuck thing and just dive into like a big pool of coins.
I want to dive into a big pool of comic books. I'm going to come to your house and dive into a big pool of Batmobiles.
How dare you, sir? Good night.
Night.